Recently, DCCconcepts released their new super panel. Anyone familiar with the frustrations and limitations of the mini panel will find that super panel is incredibly powerful and capable, and I decided to create a simple control panel to demonstrate some of the capabilities of the new super panel and how it works. The control panel shows a simple layout with a crossover, a three-way point, and a single point. There are 4-point motors for the crossover, 2-point motors for the three-way point, and 1-point motor for the single point, a total of 7-point motors. In addition, there are 5 block detectors, one at the end of each siding. The perspex makes it easy to see what's going on behind the scenes. The control panel uses just one super panel and one mimic panel. The accessory decoder is only there to read the status of the 5 block decoders. The super panel has 47 physical inputs and another 3 logical inputs for a total of 50 inputs. Each physical input consists of a signal wire and a ground wire. If you short the signal wire to ground, then the input is described as going low, and this will trigger a series of commands. There are 20 commands for each low input. The input wires can use either the small 2-pin plugs or the screw terminals. The single point number 4 is controlled by a switch. Operating this switch shorts the input to ground. The input goes low, and this triggers the low command string. The first command in the command string is to reverse point 4. The super panel issues an accessory command to change the point motor, and the mimic board picks up the same command and changes the LEDs on the panel to reflect the change and show the route set. Turn the switch off and the input is no longer shorted out. It is open and is described as going high. When the input goes high, this will trigger another 20 commands, and the first command in the high string is to switch point motor 4 back to normal, and again the mimic picks it up and switches the control panel. So potentially you have 20 commands when the input is low and another 20 commands when the input is high, for a total of 40 command steps for each input. 50 inputs times 40 command steps per input gives the potential of 2,000 command steps, more than enough for most applications. The single point 4 is connected to the three-way point, so when the point is reversed, it makes logical sense to reverse the first part of the three-way point number 5 and turn off the LEDs for the other 2 roads. So when switch number 4 is operated, the command string includes additional commands to set up the three-way point for that route. Similarly, when point 4 is switched off, the command string switches back the three-way point. You can see the commands going through the mimic panel readout as point number 4 is switched on and off. So it's switching 4, 5 and 6 each time. Normally the super panel is so fast that you'd be hard pressed to see the mimic board readout change. But to make it easier, I've inserted a half-second delay between each command so you can see each command on the mimic readout as it is made. This is how you can use a switch to control an input to super panel. But you can do the same thing with a button. If you select route 6 with a push button, then it not only selects this route, but it also logically resets 4 and 5. The same with route 5. Route 4 is also set up with its own button, which works just as well as the switch. The press buttons are momentary, so that they only use the low side of the input. The high commands are not used, but can still be addressed by a program without affecting the operation of the push buttons. So those 20 high commands are not wasted and can still be used if necessary. The crossover has 3 logical routes through it. Route 1 is both tracks straight through. Route 2 is bottom left to top right, and route 3 is top left to bottom right. Each of these routes is controlled by a pair of alpha switch I buttons. The buttons are duplicated to show the routes. The alpha switch I buttons have 2 connections. One connection is to the mimic panel to show the LED status, and the other connection is to the super panel to control the input. When button 1 is pressed, this triggers the input to the super panel, which issues commands to change all 4 point motors to normal or straight on. These commands are picked up by the mimic panel, which switches the number 1 LED green and the number 2 and 3 LEDs red to show the correct route. Routes 2 and 3 work in the same way. So they change the appropriate points and show the route using the mimic panel LEDs. Again, you can see the change on the mimic panel. So it's very easy to set up the super panel to control points and to interlock points in a logical fashion and to create routes through a layout. It's very simple to set up a single button to create routes from one end of the layout to the other. The super panel is also capable to run train automation. The extra button number 12 is set up to start an automation cycle. I have written 2 short programs, one for each of 2 locomotives, starting with loco A at position 7 and loco B at position 11. Both engines travel from one end to the other and back again, so that engine B ends up in position 7 and engine A ends up in position 11. The super panel can then logically switch the 2 engines and rerun the same program, but with the locos reversed, and that way the locos will end up where they started. You can do the same thing with 3 or 4 engines, swapping the locos each time and rerunning the same programs to save space. Super panel can control locos with all the normal ways you'd expect, with forward, backward, speed, etc. At present, the actual track doesn't exist, so I can't demonstrate the automation. However, just as an illustration, if you press number 12, the super panel will set up the route for loco A to go from 7 to 10 and loco B to go from 11 to 8. And when it's finished doing that, it'll flash for a few seconds, just as a demonstration. Normally, the LED for number 12 would stay on for as long as the program is running. This is just a very simple demonstration of some of the things that can be done with super panel. What it can do is only limited by your imagination. Super panel does parallel processing, so that running a program can be done at the same time as switching points, and several points can be switched at the same time, and several locomotives controlled at the same time. This small demonstration control panel only uses 13 inputs, so there are still 37 inputs waiting to be used. The super panel is an incredibly powerful tool that can be used for so many things, simple or complicated. Certainly, the combination of super panel and the mimic panel makes designing and building control panels much easier and simpler. And the control panel will always show the correct information regardless of how changes are made. If you use switches, buttons, levers, the ProCab, or a computer program, the control panel will always show the correct position for each junction. There are copies of the SuperPanel manual on the DCCconcepts website, along with some examples of ways in which the SuperPanel can be used. This SuperPanel forum section is also designed to help anyone who has any questions, so please feel free to post questions on the forum. Happy hunting!